Hello again. I'm Bishop Ken Brin, and we're going to look today at a topic with some difficulty in it because of its extensive nature. We're going to look at the problem of sin and evil in the eyes and the manner of speaking of Teilhard de Chardin, and we want to work on the problem, but I don't have any qualms in saying we're not apt to solve it all. So, and just hang in, and we're going to give you some thoughts on it in the course of this discussion. First of all, to begin with, it's probably good to talk a little bit about original sin, because in that question of original sin, it got Teilhard into a lot of trouble. He and his position as a paleontologist had noted that for humankind to make the step through the evolutionary steps and stages, there would have necessarily been a crowd of humans that came to a reflective state, not just one or two, that then somehow birthed the entire human race. So rather, that leaves a clear picture for the anthropologists. They see it very clearly that way, that it would be a group of many that probably reach reflective state, and we've seen some make it and some not. The Neanderthals were self-reflective. We've got indications of that in their art and their work that we've found and studied. But the problem is that they also got wiped out by another group of people that were a little bit more developed in their self-reflective. Even the shapes of their body and head and so on indicated a higher development in the brain and the nervous system. So that it wasn't just one thing happening, one person and one man and one woman. That doesn't really create a problem, because your nature of being a self-reflective human being is not based on your DNA, but it's based on the fact that you are self-reflective. The fact that you are in a conscious jump or evolutionary development stage beyond the primates. And that's the primary issue. What makes us what we are is that self-reflection. So the fact that there's different parental DNA in the lines, and that's beginning to be looked at closely, and it's beginning to be indicated too. There was a time in which we thought the line of humans came from one woman, and tracing back by mitochondrial DNA back to Africa. That's been questioned and not quite so clear anymore with more research. So it doesn't make too much difference, because what came out of the whole situation was when Teilhard challenged that issue, the people in a faith position with Scripture, Genesis 1 especially in hand, and the first 3 chapters of Genesis, and then combined with scholarly discussion and research through the centuries, found themselves really threatened a lot, because it seemed to threaten the whole basis of original sin and a whole lot of Paul's teaching about sin from one man and redemption from one man. That has been not overcome yet, and nor has it been totally discussed at length in articles that I've seen. I have seen some things that people are relaxing about it, and the way I look at it is something like this, that one of the things that has to happen with Teilhard's insightful and visionary work is that Scripture needs to be retaught and looked at. We need some very good presentations of Scripture to show up, so that we can see how to look at what the Scriptures are saying from an evolutionary point of view. And when you do that with Genesis 1, 2, and 3, you very quickly realize that Genesis is talking about a story of beginnings, that they were exchanged, and that they're more in the area of a metaphor of what's had been happening and not a description of what happened. The first shock we had with that several years ago, when we had to realize that the earth just didn't get made in about 8,000 years, as some people have gone back and deciphered some of the genealogy in the book of Exodus and said, okay, then that means the earth is this many years old. Well, that no one's there anymore. We are very much more aware that the earth took a long time to be formed, and that humankind's self-reflective nature is much, much older than 8,000 years. So all of that we've gotten comfortable with. Now we have to get comfortable with the concepts that are there. I've kind of, in a way, summarized those first 3 chapters by saying it's a prophetic discussion of life in fullness, because there never was a time there was a perfect situation for Adam and Eve to be born into. That just didn't exist in an evolutionary model. And of course, due to a whole lot of other work here that we've been doing, the evolutionary model is not a theory in my mind. It is a discussion of what did happen and what is going on right now. We're in the middle of it. And whereas you had the kind of the static view of things that said this was the way it was created, and that's all together now. We just got to understand it better, and that's basically an atomic view of life. That the science and the atomic view have done the same thing. Where they've said that's what it is, and then they try to get it pared down to all the small parts of it and everything else. And Einstein comes along and says, no, not so fast. Time and space are bending, and they're relative. And that really upset this scientific atom kind of thing. And Teilhard has certainly upset the very nice tight box package of biblical interpretation and discussion and scholastic development from that same position. So you have to get in the idea of we're in a flow, that the flow of evolution is what was past. We're actually flowing through it and in it, and it will go on beyond this. And so when you begin to look at truth that way, it's easier to see how quantum mechanics will talk about something being in different places according to what the observer is doing with it, and how they can change things by changing one spot here and it changes over there, and it's the same thing. I mean, it gets into some pretty interesting kinds of things that are really quite supportive to Teilhard's way of thinking. We were talking earlier this afternoon, and I believe that Teilhard did have some connection and some awareness of quantum mechanics, because the quantum mechanics came about in the 20s or so, and of course he died in 55. And he managed to keep himself abreast of a lot of things. So I see reflections of his, and he talks about it. And he went to see a cyclotron in California, and so he was very much aware of the scientific research and things going on. Back to the issue then of what happens, and the way that this article, I'll give you all a copy of these. This article is The Life and Death of Chardin War Years, and particularly this is God in Suffering, Finding God in Suffering. And he makes it clear that and this author writing in here makes it clear that the way to see this is that anything that is in motion and anything in evolution that's going on carries with it a dual problem of rising and falling, and so that and there's a process of testing and getting adjusted to things, and that creates a lot of difficulty. It makes it happen that will explain to some degree how some of the species cease to exist, because things change and things are in motion. One of the little comments I make about the death of the dinosaurs, there's some good evidence it didn't just do with some asteroid putting a winter of long ice age upon the world. There's more than that behind it, because if you look at the things that I know one scientist looked at, was he saw that in the time of the dinosaurs, the barometric pressure was 2.2 times stronger than it is now, and there's 34% oxygen in the atmosphere. Well, with that combination of extra pressure combined for quicker healing and also for absorption of oxygen into the body easier, and that higher level of oxygen, that's why a dinosaur could exist. It's doubtful that a dinosaur could exist in our day-to-day, because they wouldn't have the lung capacity to drive the huge bodies they had. And so that changed, and as that changed, that species couldn't make it, you know, and so it might have died in a hurry from an asteroid hitting and so on and so forth, but there's other things involved. And that's been true of other species and other things, that the evolutionary process is working to get someplace, and that takes testing and failure and so on. So there is a quality of suffering throughout the situation. However, even with that thought in mind, the issue for humankind is once we become a reflective group of people, then we have a problem that we can create evil by choice, and that becomes a real problem. And so now we have a different issue, but we also have a built-in drive to the problem. And I'm looking here, I want to quickly find this one quote that I have. Yeah, here it is. It's simply the problem is summarized in a way this way. It simply symbolizes the inevitable chance of evil which accompanies the existence of all participated being. So now it's using evil in a way you may not want to do it, and so on. It's a little different thinking about it, but you're looking at the difficulty and the testing in the process and the ups and downs and then death. You're looking at that, calling that evil. So that's not the same thing as sin, where it's consciously chosen evil. That's different. So, but wherever being is in motion, in production, it's in movement, suffering and wrong immediately appear as its shadow, not only as a result of the tendency towards inaction and selfishness found in creatures. So you see this, you can begin to see the shadow of that even in the formation of molecules, in the formation of particles to be in an atom. And so when you get to that point, it becomes in creatures, but also as an inevitable concomitant of their effort to progress. As things want to progress, you got this problem, this shadow of evil. Original sin is the essential reaction of the finite to the creative act. Now that's taken original sin on a broad basis statement, and it's saying that it's in all of creation. Where it becomes a problem with reflective human beings is it becomes an essential reaction because we're in motion, we're coming to be, and so I change it just slightly. Original sin is the essential reaction of the finite to evolution, or the creative act, but evolution particularly. So when you finally begin to see that sets it up, then we have a much different kind of view about original sin. First of all, we can go back to Paul and say, yeah, Paul's writing is saying that in one man sin came and death was part of it. That you got to think that through a little bit. And if you think in terms of him talking about mankind as a whole as a man, then it makes some sense. But it's also got to be looked at a little bit differently, because the whole question of death is seen, in that sense, can be seen as an evil to be gotten out of, as it were, and that's not a very good definition of death. Death is a necessary process of creation, progress, dying, and rebirth. And there's no way around that. If you start looking around at things, everything, somebody has said, it'd be really interesting to see how many molecules of everybody you got in you. Because the fact of the matter is we've been sharing a lot. That used to be one of my little humorous things I'd say. If you're going to talk about somebody being buried in the ground, and so it upgrows some plants, and the cow comes along and eats it, and you eat the cow, who gets the molecules in the resurrection? It gets to be kind of crazy there, because but you have an issue that death is far more important in terms of its bringing the ability to spring forward into another whole dimensional depth of existence and intensity of existence, and we have every indication that even from such things as near-death experiences that people discuss with us, and other such kinds of research, you begin to realize that there's just a whole lot more. And granted, we're into a certain level of faith because we don't really have any scientific testing for life after death that makes any sense. Well, that's because science is only looking at the outside of things. When we look at the inside of things and we look through our faith, that becomes easy to see that there's a whole transformation that occurs, and that death is part of that process. So then we can say that even so, the death in its worst instance is overcome by the very presence of the redemptive nature of the Word in incarnation. And in any case, just even looking at it from the point of view of the transformation to a higher state, we can easily say, death, where is your sting? And people who've got a solid, deep walk in faith generally are not troubled too much by the thought of dying, nor do they manifest problems when they die. Now, you get somebody that doesn't have that, and death is extremely frightening and difficult for them to look at. And so I always like, as a little summary to this death issue, I like that one man said, having to make the choice about coming to be born was more gutsy than good attitude towards dying. so anyway, that's a whole other topic, that kind of thing. But if we begin to look at then of the problem of progress that created that failure is part of it, then that's a condition. That original sin is a condition that pervades through humans, no matter where they are, where they were born, and it's not a question of having to be saved in some kind of way from the problem that Adam created because he fouled up creation because he sinned. No, all of that problem and difficulty was in the picture from the moment creation was made. Now that to me is a lot more sensible, and it also makes sense that when you understand that if there's spirit in everything, then there has to be present also the Word. And it's in the Word that we see the manifest result of incarnation to bring about redemption. That says to me, redemption begins the moment creation began. That redemption of that problem was already inserted, and although the Spirit is diffuse, as it were, and got to be collected and brought into greater complexification in order to see it, and so on, and that would be true of redemption too. But I really believe that the problem is laid out as a success within the situation by the divine Creator in the very process of getting creation going. Redemption is already in the flow, and it's already going to reach its culmination point in the person of Yeshua and the cross and the resurrection. We do have to then take a look at part of the problem that we have within our situation. Then is we need to take a look at the difference between evil that comes by just the way things are, and evil that comes by choice of people that make decisions that cause diminishment and breaking down of the strength of humankind. And that certainly is what sin does. It diminishes humankind. And now, along this line now, in order to keep this kind of straight and to understand the whole complexity of suffering and sin and pain, is that you have to understand the intention of creation in the first place. And the intention of creation is love. Love to bring about reflective, self-developed, self-willed, choosing people, human beings that can choose for divinity and therefore build a unity and a communion within divinity. And that's a very base purpose of the whole of creation. That's at the baseline, at the deepest level. Love is the key. Now we know that when Teilhard looked at spirit being in everything, that spirit he's talking about is love in the divine sense. And so love is at the very center. Love is pulling on all of creation to bring its testing and all its work and all its difficulty through to get to the point of what it was intended for in the first place. And if you stop and think about what it takes to get this earth working so that it will be able to support a human family or life, just life in general, it's just amazing. Bits and pieces of everything have to be exactly in place. And it's amazing that life got it on, that we got through, that life goes through that. And even though it takes a long time, it's still very amazing because it's getting the job done. And just the fact that it got to the step of humanity is phenomenal. And that's because there is a pattern, there is spirit giving design and pulling things to that goal and that end. That is also a reason why when you project that into the ahead of things, that's also why when you see that, then you know that humankind may have its moments and it may hurt and wash out a bunch of people and cause us some trouble, but the business of evolution is going to get done because it's not dependent on whether mankind is going to ruin it all or not. The Spirit is pulling it to completion, and what divinity starts, divinity finishes. So it'll get done, and it may not be with everybody in a sense that gets in the cooperative part of it, but there will be enough, and there will be enough who will yield and go forward with that, so that process in that forward thing is very important to look at because it's full of hope and excitement that it will get done. We're not going to wind up devastated and then into a pile of nothing. I watched 2 tapes last week, one in which it was very much looking at what we've done to the earth and the problem we're having. We're overpopulated in their eyes and we can't get enough food and there's starvation this and it's falling down on that we can't grow this and we're running out of oil and it's this and that. And it was a really depressing tape because it basically didn't have any sense of the inside of divinity pulling and seeing to the things getting done. Whereas the one it's here with us today, The Journey of the Universe, that's a very bright, hope-filled process and talking from the Teilhardian point of view about the flow of life from beginning to where we are now, and where we're going is implicated, kind of not said directly, but it's there, and it's full of life and brightness and getting someplace. It will, and that's the way it's going to be. So that's important to see love at the center and spirit direction in all of that, helps us to understand then what we're going to have to do with these troubles. Now, to talk about the suffering aspect, this little comment that I picked out of the book Evolutionary Faith, and this was by Carter Hayward. The suffering rooted in evil is greatly increased by our collective failure to accept the suffering that is rooted in the incompleteness of God's creation. So let me translate. As we look at evolution having an incompleteness in it, and that causes suffering, because that causes diminishment and then actually rebirth, and it's going to go through pulsing phases. That if we would look at that suffering and let it be what it is, from God's point of view, it's not a problem. So we make it the problem of thinking that somehow we're failing if we're going through this. People get sick and they think, goodness gracious, what did I do wrong? Or they have an accident, and how is this God's punishment or something like that? So that's because they're looking at this box of idea, which basically says by implication, here's this box of life and who we are, and you got to understand it. But over here is God out here, and God out here. Then we have to look at this problem through, well, why did God cause that or allow that to happen? Wait a minute now. And so all of a sudden we have to shift our gears, and we got to remember God's in here, in everything. And so when an accident happens, it's happening to God too. When sickness happening, divinity's experiencing that, and thought about it before it ever created anything, that it was going to be like that. So it's like, once you begin to see that this is part and parcel of getting someplace, it's hard work, toil, suffering, difficulty, failure, success, and joy are all part mixed in there, then you can start to begin to take a little different attitude about what you are going to go through. And when you begin to take a different attitude, again, now this happens because we're reflective. As you take a proper attitude about that, about those kind of things, you're going to transform that problem into a new level. And that's the very process that's what's going on. And that's the fullness of which we look at when we look at the cross of Jesus and the crucifixion and the resurrection, is the taking on and absorbing and raising it all to a whole nother level. And that's why the resurrection is part of that whole reality, because that tells us without a doubt that's what it's going to be. We actually work with death and resurrection all the time in our own life. And divinity in us is working in us to achieve that, and rejoicing with us, and weeping with us, and going through all this with us. So once you get that in place, then it takes out the problem that toil, work, suffering, progress, failure are all part of the picture. And we find that not only is it true, but we find that the very call of the very nature of our person is to get into that. And you find good example of that in the person of Jesus. I mean, he goes through things where he's creating issues, and he's got some people getting mad at him, and they want to kill him, or they want to toss him off the cliff, and he just looks around and checks in with what divinity's saying to him, and not time, and he slips out of there, and nobody knows where he went, and he avoids it. However, when it comes to the sense that he's going down to Jerusalem to never come back, he moves into a very definite review of the will of evolution, the will of divine in evolution, the will of divine in the whole of everything. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, he goes through a wrenching situation and finally say, okay, we're going to do it your way. and in that process gains a peace and a calmness that takes him through the whole event that nobody could understand. But that's because he had made his peace with that and had settled that issue, that obedience is not a question of God making an arbitrary rule over here. Divinity isn't saying, well, we'll just make them keep all these rules and do this and then that'll be fine. That's not. Divinity is saying, this is your nature. And your nature in the evolutionary stream is, this is what's going to happen. So, I'm there with you, walk with me through it, I'll walk with you through it, and in the process of understanding it properly, and we see this all the time with people that have got faith when they touch a difficult situation. They absolutely explode with joy and wonderment. I remember a case in which this man was very kind of tough and hard-nosed and always in charge, and all of a sudden he was facing a condition of illness that was going to take his life in pretty short order, and everybody was surprised. He just made his way right into it, said, well, this is the way it is and the way it's appropriate, and he started ministering to all the people that were helping him to get through the physical weaknesses and stuff he was going through. And they were really amazed because he was in such a good place. He was suffering, he was painful, but he had resolved an issue that is really important to get a hold of. So once we begin to look at that, now I'm gonna put that down to another level. That's somewhat expected of us, and we get examples of it and can kind of see that. Now let's talk about evil that comes to us based on the failure of humankind to be love-centered. And so out of that we get a terrorist who puts a bomb in a situation, and somebody gets, from the point of view of that situation, let's just use the example, maybe they become, they lose their legs, and so they're a paraplegic, and they've got to be cared for in a wheelchair and everything else. And so now we got a little different kind of problem here. We got something that resulted from a sin condition. Now that's from the point of view of who? That's from the point of view of the person who says it's unfair, or I just happen to be in the wrong place and that's a bad situation. Well, we got to look at this from the point of view of divinity. Divinity looks at that and says, well, that's right. We had to give freedom of that to happen. That's going to happen. And for you, between you and me, the Divine One says to the person, it's your will where you are. Now that's kind of a leap in a sense, but that's from the point of view of the Divine looking at that and saying, we understood when we created, Father, Son, and Spirit created, they understood this was going to happen, going to be the case. So there is a sense in which it is the will that you're going to have to handle that kind of thing that comes from suffering, from evil pushed out by free will. That takes a little harder stretch, and it takes persons a little longer usually to get through that and accept that. But that's from the point of view of the Divine, that's the will. And so that helps again to try and get in the proper place where then you can transform, or that person can transform evil unto good. And of course, when that happens, if you take a look at that, and when that happens, and you think about characters in history, you can look into this and see that they did that. They laid down their lives, they suffered a lot, and it was done for people, and it causes a huge explosion of light happens, and people catch on, and it raises up the whole level of the quality of life in a situation. A whole group of people get interested in the Lord, change their lives, all kinds of things begin to happen when people get that right. That releases the energy. And Chardin talks at length about the release of energy from suffering that is part of the fullness of evolution coming to pass at all of its magnificence. And again, back to the image we get in with the person of Yeshua, then it becomes really crystal clear how much that is true. And then scriptures talk about that very clearly, about the importance of what that release was for the earth and for all of humankind. And it then calls us to be conscious of the fact it's like that for us too, and we need to be able to see it that way. One of the things that I believe, because divinity looked at this before they created, divinity knew that there was going to be this problem of suffering and evil and death that was going to come out of wanting to bring the creation into place that can result in that fullness that will lead to the unity desired of love and oneness. That in that, looking at that and seeing that was going to happen, provided all right in it for redemption by the presence of the Word through that moment of creation, that if Spirit's present, so is the Word present. So the incarnation has begun, even at the point of creation, to overcome that evil. It's already in place to work and heal toward it. But we see that in fullness of manifestation. At the next level will be in Yeshua, that He comes and takes that place with us in our daily living as a normal human being, as well as being that divine mixture. That then gives us the image and gives us the go forward that we need. But then you look forward and you see that there's another incarnation of divinity that is complete and it will be completed in the omega finish point of evolution. So we look at three stages of this developing redemption. Very beginning, the person manifested in Jesus, and then the fullness in omega. And when you see that, then you begin to get a wee picture of one thing, the depth of love that drives the whole situation. It is absolutely almost to a wordless position when you talk and really get a hold of that. You can't hardly hang on to it. It's so huge. We also begin to see that the principle then makes a lot of sense, that divinity had a plan for renewing the redemption of all things, and even the overcoming of evil that is chosen by people that is so brutal and so awful, had a plan for that from the beginning, and the greater is the finish than the evil therein ever will be or could be, because of the marvel of love that is the depth of the understanding. That's a bit of a faith thing to grab a hold of that, and it's a bit of a challenge to do it. But it really does help bring some peace to the issue when you got to look at all this suffering and sin and whatnot that's in the earth. I'm going to take a pause.